Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Impossible Podcast. Today on the show, I've got my good friend, Chris Guillebeau. He's the author of the Art of Nonconformity blog. He's the host of the very popular podcast, Side Hustle School. He's the author of 5 books, including his latest one, Side Hustle. This week, we're talking about side hustles, how having a side hustle can change your perspective on what you think is possible. And personally, I have to thank Chris a lot. Chris was one of the first people that made me think it was possible to live life differently and do something impossible. He was the biggest influence on me when I first started blogging. And if you look up in the archives of the site, you'll find out that Chris's meetup for the first book that he wrote was the impetus for me to start my own blog. But a couple of things first before we get into the interview. First of all, if you're trying to start something new this new year and you're having a hard time getting off the ground, the best way to do that is to change your mindset. We're doing that this month as a group through the Cold Shower Therapy Winter Challenge. If you go to impossiblechallenges.com, you can join a Facebook group, and there we have a group of people who are doing the Cold Shower Therapy Challenge over the next 30 days. We're doing it through the winter because it's freezing, it's cold, it's uncomfortable, and that's what we're practicing, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, so when it comes to the other things in life, we can do those too. So check that out at impossiblechallenges.com. It's a cool little community of people doing hard things. Also, at the end of the show, I'll be giving away 3 copies of Chris's new book, Side Hustle, From Idea to Income in 27 Days. If you guys want to know how to win that book, go ahead and listen to the end of the episode where I'll give you instructions on how to do just that. Also, if you guys need a reminder every day to push your limits and do something impossible, go check out impossiblegear.com. It's the best way to get comfortable while doing something uncomfortable. And if you wear your Impossible shirt while starting your next business idea, you might just start the next SpaceX. It's true. So check that out at impossiblegear.com. All right, that's all I've got for news and announcements for today. Let's go ahead and jump into my interview with Chris Guillebeau. All right, and we're live. Today, I've got Chris Guillebeau, visitor of 193 countries, creator of the Art of Nonconformity website, the World Domination Summit conference he hosts every year in Portland, and the host of the Side Hustle School podcast that's gotten over 12 million downloads last year. Did I get that number right?
Yeah, I just keep clicking, every day. I'm like, I get my, 24 downloads to try to get it up there.
So 12 million downloads last year.
Got the cat working on it too.
And the author of 5 books, including your latest, Side Hustle, From Idea to Income in 27 Days. Chris, welcome to the show.
Dude, it's a huge honor. I've been following your work for years, as you know, and it's been just amazing to see all the stuff that you've done. So can't wait to see what you do next.
So before we get into that, I actually, for those of you guys who don't know, Chris is one of 3 integral people that's responsible for me trying to start a blog and do the online thing and figuring out back when I was a unemployed UPS worker that you could go do something different other than try to get a crappy job or try to call Starbucks and have them not respond to you. And so Chris, I did the annual review that I've been doing the last 7 years because of you the last week. And I need to let everybody know the impact that you had in shaping the last 5 to 7 years of my life.
Dude, that's amazing. Well, cool. Like I said, you've been a big part of all of our stuff too, so it is mutual. And I think I forgot the whole thing about UPS. We must have talked about that like 5 years ago because, my last job, way back when I was 19 was working for Fedex basically. And I quit that job. Obviously, I worked there for like 3 weeks and then left one day and never returned. So I totally forgotten that we had that in common.
Yeah, I think it's there's something about the manual labor of picking up boxes and setting them back down and trying to. I think you were in the warehouse. I was doing the runs to the houses and trying not to get chased by dogs or slip on ice in the dead of winter in Chicago. Wow. And there's something about that you're like, there's got to be better options out there. Sure. I think.
Yeah, probably not the best long-term plan. Like it's character
You're like,
building for like 10 days. And then you're like, okay, what's next?
you're like, I don't know if I can do the entrepreneur thing, but for me, I did the UPS thing in the middle of the economic downturn in 2009, and so they hired for extra help, and the economy was so bad, people weren't even sending packages, so they didn't even need me, and so my first paycheck after all the union dues and everything else came out to like $7.
Wow.
And that was
you're like, I need to do something different, basically.
yeah. And so I was filling my other time with just reading the Brief Guide to World Domination, and your other one,
That's so awesome.
279 days to that was the World Domination one. But so I want to talk about a couple things, but if you want to give people a little bit of your backstory, because we've been kind of just talking about it without filling people in, a little bit about your backstory about traveling, the 193 project, and then we'll get into what you're working on now.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. Well, you said some really kind things about some of my work. I'm an author, traveler, entrepreneur. I've been working for myself for 20 years now. And, initially out of necessity, like we were just talking about, but somewhere along the way, I actually forged a bit of a career from it. I spent 4 years living in West Africa as an aid worker. And that was a very transformative experience for me, kind of just, changed how I thought about life and the world and travel and culture and all kinds of stuff. So coming back from that, I was turning 30 and I was like, okay, like what's next? I've been fortunate to do a number of different things, but there's nothing that kind of connects them or ties them together. And so that's when I started the Art of Nonconformity, and also officially began the quest to visit every country in the world, which is my Instagram handle, 193 countries. That was the Project 193 that you mentioned. And I had been doing it kind of informally on my own, like no public component, for probably the first 70 or 80 countries or so. But then I started writing about it, and this was in 2008. And began writing about the quest, and it kind of evolved to writing about other stuff, like how to find alternative solutions to life, how to live the life that you want, not the one that other people expect or presume that you should have, how to kind of navigate different situations like that. And then everything kind of came from there, like the books and the conference and everything else. It wasn't strategic. It's not like 10 years ago I said, oh, I'm going to start this blog and it's going to lead to this new career. It was more like, I feel like I have something to say, so I'm going to start writing about it, and I'm going to learn, along the way. And I started doing meetups around the country and around the world. I think you were at a couple of them, Joel, and it's like everything I did informed what happened next. So now I have a global community, just like you do with Impossible Project, and I just feel fortunate that I can write and travel and now produce the podcast and do fun stuff like that.
So a couple of the things that I think immediately drew people to your story was, one, you had the global project of 193 countries. And I remember thinking when I was at UPS, you launched your site maybe like a year and a half before I was like in this rut of everything. And so when I was unemployed and trying to find something back in 2009, I kind of glommed onto your site, and I think I read every single post, 2 or 3 times. So
I'm sorry about that, because some of them weren't that great.
But I went through, all that, and I think what kind of drew people was this: you had this quote that you don't have to live your life the way anybody tells you to, or an amalgamation of something like that. And that's kind of informed the last 5 books that you've written. And last year you came up, you kind of did something way outside your comfort zone, or way outside what you have done with this podcast. And can you talk a little bit about how you moved from kind of generically talking about changing, art of nonconformity, doing things differently, and then specifically focusing on the practical ways you can do that with businesses and side hustles?
Yeah. Okay. So a few different points here. I think, first of all, I think there's just a great saturation of so-called thought leaders, and, everybody's like kind of building this pillar to themselves, and it's not all negative like that. I know that sounds negative to say it that way, but I do believe everybody has something to say. Everybody has a message, but I think, just considering it from a business perspective or an impact perspective, I feel that a lot of people are just kind of frustrated with maybe broad general messages. And I think the future, or at least the present, I think what people are looking for now is less strategy and more tactics, which is kind of the opposite of what you've always heard. I think people actually want to here's exactly what you can go and do. And if you do this, it's going to give you options to do what's important to you. So I'm not telling you what to do with your life. That's for you to figure out. But if I can provide tools, and practical support for you to make the choices that are important to you, then that's great. And that's what I'm doing with the Side Hustle School Project. So that's the first point. I think the second thing is last year I had a different book out called Born for This. I went and did a tour of about 30 cities. And I would give like a 30-minute stump speech. And in that 30 minutes, for like 1 minute, I would mention side hustles. And I'd be like, oh, by the way, it's like a little side note, no matter what else you're doing, you should have more than one source of income, even if you love your job, for all kinds of reasons. And here are some stories of people who are doing that. Here are a couple of practical things you can do. So it would just be like 1 minute of the 30-minute talk. And then afterwards, pretty much everywhere I went, like 50% of the questions would be about that. And so I was like, okay, basically people, my audience is telling me like what they want essentially. And this is a topic that I'm qualified, to do. It's what I've been doing for 20 years. I've never actually had like the real job. I've never actually built a huge company or anything, but I know a lot about starting these small kind of projects. And I've been writing about side hustles. I just hadn't really focused on it and said like, okay, that's going to be my thing. So I decided to kind of go all in, which kind of leads me to the third point. I was like, okay, for 2017 and now 2018 as well, this is going to be my thing because one strength and weakness is I like to do a lot of different stuff. And in some ways, like I said, it's a strength and I would never want to just choose one thing, but in other ways, like I can sometimes feel divided and like not giving enough attention to something that needs more attention. So I was like 2017, 2018, the year of the side hustle, basically for me. And so that's when I started the podcast that is every single day, 7 days a week. That's when I wrote the book. That's when I'm doing a new tour, which is so far taking me to about 45 cities. I want to get to 100 cities before I stop. So I wanted to make that my whole focus.
What I like about the podcast is that it's short. Like you mentioned switching to tactics, like too close for strategy, switching to tactics or something like that, the show is what, 5 to 8 minutes. I don't think anything really goes over 10 minutes, but they're short, actionable ideas. And it almost is, if someone comes to the table with excuses of why they can't come up with a business, the show is basically a waterfall that just cascades over all their excuses. So like, hey, we have,
that's great. I love
400.
That's good. I should put that on the website. Joel Runyon. It's a waterfall that cascades over your excuses.
There you go. But it's 400 examples of real people building, these businesses from, or side hustles from $400 a month to, 20 crazy businesses that are legitimately changing people's lives. And do you have any specific stories that have really stuck out, or people that, if people are thinking about, hey, but what about me? Do you have any specific stories that really pop out that you like to kind of pull out of your back pocket when you're talking about this?
Yeah, I mean, I have so many. One of the go-to ones is Teresa Greenway, who's a bit older and wasn't as familiar with technology as some of us are, and she was always passionate about baking bread. Like that was her thing. She's really good at baking sourdough bread. So her daughter ended up helping her like film this course, like a Udemy course, in her kitchen using her iPhone, and basically was like, we're going to make this course of you teaching people how to bake sourdough bread. We're going to put it online. Showed her how to do it, and that course made like $25,000 the first year. And then the second year, she's like, okay, I'm going to really go all in with this. And she did 5 courses. They were all about baking bread. They're all about sourdough bread. She's like owning the sourdough bread niche, So, and the funny thing is, like this, this sourdough bread empire, last year it brought her like $85,000. And so, first of all, $85,000, that's amazing. But second of all, she was actually in a really rough spot when she started this project. She was living in poverty, and she had left an abusive relationship. She had a son with autism, and she was working as a housekeeper in a motel. So it was basically the equivalent of, the UPS FedEx job, except instead of being 20 like you and I were, she was like 60 something and, had been through all these experiences. So basically the $85,000 was the most money she'd ever made in her life. And it basically changed her life and allowed her to put a down payment on a home, which she'd never owned before, all that kind of stuff. So life-changing, and also baking bread, right? It's not something that, like, it's kind of an old technology, right? So it's the kind of thing where there's lots of ways to make bread. Like, you don't have to buy her course, but it seems like she's connecting with people in some authentic way that they value and they're willing to pay for it. So that's like my story about like someone who's like changing lives and like going from what they're really good at. Quick little story of somebody who's like, I just want to have a side hustle. this guy was really interested in drop shipping, which is where like basically other companies are sending out stuff for people come to your website and place an order, and then you don't have to handle the inventory. Somebody else sends it out. And he approached this perspective from, I just want to have a side hustle. I don't care what the product is, essentially. And so he made a list of like 100 different products, and he had these different criteria he was looking at. He's like, okay, there has to be more than one manufacturer for it, so I'm not too dependent. It has to be a market where there's not a lot of competitors. It has to be relatively high price because I need enough profit margin and so on. So basically, he narrows down his list of 100 ideas to the final idea, which is bouncy castles, like adult bouncy castles or bounce houses, which people like rent or buy for their party or something, So he starts this website and basically has like frequently asked questions about bouncy castles, and he masters his SEO and gets like on the first page of Google. And in the first year, he makes $300,000 from the bouncy castle dropshipping site. And it's not like when he was a kid, that was his passion. It's not like he was like, I want to grow up and sell bouncy house castles. He just kind of thought logically, how can I find something that I can then apply my skills to and get that out to people and make money from? So there's all kinds of ways people are making money. And every day I try to highlight a different one on the show.
So one of the things that I can imagine that a lot of people come up with is the mindset aspect of going from just being someone who goes to their job, checks in, checks out, to thinking that, hey, I could do this. Like this is possible for someone like me. And is there, when I, going back to, your original blog and your original PDFs and manifestos and everything that you wrote, those are the things for me that made me think, hey, maybe I could try this too. Is there something that you tell people who are new to the side hustle world, who are kind of thinking about jumping in, but also, maybe thinking, part of it is, hey, you give them an episode every single day and you're showing them example after example after example. But is there anything else that you kind of show people to say, hey, you can get over this, mindset aspect and you can do it too?
Well, I think the waterfall or the cascade, as you called it, of examples is good because, you might not relate to every single person that you hear about, but you're going to hear somebody that sounds like you, and you're going to realize like, oh, they didn't have any advantage that you lack. And there is something that you can do. I guess maybe the other thing is like, I've deliberately targeted this project to people who are not entrepreneurs, who are not self-employed, and who don't necessarily even want to be those things. And I do that because I really felt, and I feel somewhat, partially responsible for this, but I feel like there's this kind of thing in our culture where, all the messages about entrepreneurship are like, you have to quit your job. And if you don't quit your job, like, what's wrong with you? Why would you possibly want to work, for a company or organization, right? And like, I come from that perspective because that's been my experience, but lots of people are actually working for good companies or for the right organization, or they like being part of a team, or maybe they're working for other entrepreneurs, or maybe it's just like a time in their life where they can't just, quit their job tomorrow and take a lot of risk, and they've got a family and a mortgage and all that kind of stuff. So I felt like nobody was actually catering to those people because, again, all the other messages were like very much kind of high risk, or at least, encouraging people to leap without a net and all that stuff. So I was like, this is basically for people who are in that situation where they actually like their job, or for whatever reason, they can't leave their job now and don't want to. What can you do where you are? Like, what can you do with the skills you already have, with the limited time that you have? Because you don't have 20 extra hours a week. How can you really create an asset for yourself so that you have more security that brings you options in the future, so that one day, even if you love your job, if the situation changes and all of a sudden you don't love it, then you've got something else you can work on. Or even if not, like, at least you have a creative outlet. You can look at something and say that you made this. Like, it just feels so empowering, as like, to get paid from different sources and to get paid outside a paycheck. And so I want everybody to kind of feel that. So I would say that maybe just encouraging people that they're not alone, and that there's lots of people out there who have similar goals and are kind of going down a similar path. Perhaps that helps a little bit.
So every time I hear someone go on the jobs are terrible rant, right, and they get really, I'm like, who hurt you? Like, what happened? Because something about that tells me, like, jobs, as long as you have a job that is interesting to you and it's not draining you out, and your boss isn't terrible. If you hate your job, that's one thing. But if you have a decent job and you get a paycheck every month or every week, every 2 weeks, I haven't had one in a long time that tells you what I know. But it's like, that sounds like a good gig sometimes. Like, exactly. Yeah,
You
You
can.
don't have to worry all the time about, paychecks and, uh, all that. But one of the things that I like how you've structured the show is that it is, you, if you're stuck in a job or not, I don't want to use the word stuck, but if you're in a job and you usually are presented with one of those two options, either
Mhm.
full-time entrepreneurship, go, raise funding or quit
Right.
your job and just figure it out, or you're stuck in, or you're in your day job and there's no one in your day job maybe talking about entrepreneurship. And so even just tuning in and having 10 minutes a day of examples and changing the environment that you're in, or uh, the realm of what's possible, kind of starts to change things, just because you're surrounding yourself in your eardrums with these stories of people who made it
Mhm.
happen. And I think that is just one of those things that, as if you hear it enough times, and you're doing a show every single day, if you hear
Mhm.
it enough times, one of these days, eventually some idea is going to spring up in the back of your head and you're like, maybe I'll try that.
Yeah, I mean, and if they're listening to the show, to your show, or to my show, or anything like this, like they've already identified themselves as being pro change, and as being like people who want to better themselves. Like I know that everybody's busy, like nobody has free time, but if you're listening to this right now, like you've chosen to kind of invest in yourself because you want something greater than what you've known before, or what your friends are doing, and so anything that we can do to support those people is great. Like ultimately they're the ones doing the work. Like I always want to acknowledge that whenever I get feedback of somebody's like, oh, I was able to quit my job because of something, in the book or whatever. I'm like, wow, that's awesome. Like I really am honored to be part of it. But let's be clear, lots of people read the book and never do anything, probably, 90% plus, so you're the one, you're the one who took action, right? So you should be, commended for that. And I'm glad to be like a little support.
So for people who are looking at this and saying, "Hey, what can a side hustle really do for me?" Like you said, it depends on the work. It depends on what people put into it. It depends on, the opportunities you're finding and everything. But, when you talk about this, it is a lot of people still do have that mindset of either I need to go find something that's going to make me, replace uh, my day job income,
Mm-hmm.
or it's not worth doing. And
Mm-hmm.
what's like a realistic way to look at side hustles in a way that someone can kind of just start tinkering with stuff and and
Mm-hmm.
and find out what comes up?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's kind of scary to think like the only option is you have to replace your day job from a salary that presumably like you've been working in that job for a while, and maybe you have a college degree or some other qualification that you're an expert, you're pretty good at your job. So that's going to be really hard all of a sudden, tomorrow or next week or next month to replace that. So I think that is why people rightly feel maybe intimidated, or not intimidated, but they just feel kind of daunted by it. And so like I said about the whole $500 a month thing, like it's somewhat an arbitrary number. It's like the subtitle of the book is From Idea to Income in 27 Days. So I put together this 27-day format where every day you have one step. Yes, day one, step one, day two, step two. So you have this whole thing. It's really funny because people ask like, why 27? They think like I don't start with like I want to have 27 steps. I start with like, what is the outcome? What am I trying to teach people? And then what is the best way to then break that down? And then the framework comes from that. So 27 is somewhat arbitrary. $500 a month is somewhat arbitrary. However, like for people who are listening, like you can ask yourself, like, what would $500 a month extra do for me? Like, what would that mean? If it wasn't coming from my paycheck, but it was coming from somewhere else, or $1,000 a month or whatever it is. So I hear like story after story just about every night when I'm on tour of people who talk about how like the first time they made something and sold it, right? Which could just be on Etsy or on eBay or something like that. Something really, really simple. Maybe they learned to make a basic website, and in 2 weeks, they had a blog, or they had a product or some kind of consulting or coaching service. They got their first client. They talk about how like when they made that first sale, it feels different than anything they've ever experienced. And they feel like they've almost look at their life differently. Like, wow, I can't believe like a stranger, sent me $60 or something. And, often it leads to like much more, after that, like you actually end up growing a business and making a lot more money. But even just the act of doing it is empowering. So that's why I'm trying to encourage people to take action quickly. A couple of things you can do. You can do a little inventory of your skills, like focus more on your skills than your passion. I think people ask themselves too much, like, what am I passionate about? How can I make a business out of it? Let's think about what you're good at, what's valuable, helpful, useful to other people. What kind of questions do people ask you about all the time? Like what comes easy to you that's hard for other people, and so on. And then the second approach is, don't follow a passion, follow a problem. Like pay attention throughout daily life to things that frustrate you, that annoy you, that could be done better. And find a way to create a simple solution to something. Don't worry about changing the world. Don't worry about making the next iPhone. Focus on something that you can fix, right? Something that you can fix and improve and make somebody's life better. And that's, I don't want to say it's easy. Like I try not to use the word easy because, things that are worth doing sometimes require effort, and, you might fail in one way and you have to try again, but it can be simple. I guess that's what I mean to say. It can be simple.
One of the things that I liked about the focus on no passion is that's the kind of the reverb that just keeps going on. It's follow your passion, follow your passion, follow your passion. And one of the things that I found is that one, it's not necessarily useful to other people. I can like ice cream.
Right.
I can be very passionate about ice cream. Yeah. And, if I don't know how to make it, or if I'm not giving it to people faster, or if I'm just loving ice cream, I'm just gonna sit on the couch and eat ice cream and not do anything. It doesn't necessarily translate to anything profitable. But the other thing is that a lot of the things that like people can find these niches in, like sourdough bread, they could be they can seem boring on the surface, but then as you dig in, there's really something to it, and you can kind of fall in love with the overall problem, like you said, of solving that problem, and then that solving that problem becomes your passion or whatever. You get really interested in it, and that can be its own thing.
It can be very rewarding, to know that you're helping people and to see payment notifications come in, and you're like, wow, somebody actually chose to, spend the $39 on the bread course or whatever. And, then you go and look at your ratings and you see all these people with nice things to say. It's like, it can actually be very motivating to do that. And so, yeah, you may not be the most passionate about that topic or whatever, but then as you said, as you follow your skill and realize the intersection between, your skill and how that's benefiting other people, that's almost like a self-reinforcing circle.
One of the other things is, I think once you find out that you can create something and put it out there in the world, and then like you just made something and out of nothing, that for me, it's been one of those landmark things where once I realized I could go ahead and affect the world. And I think Steve Jobs has a quote about, once you realize that everything in the world is made up by people just like you, you can make your own things and you can go do your own things. And even something like that is making it like a $20 thing that you're going to sell on Etsy, and you're going to go put it out there. You're going to make $20 and 18 of that is profit. But the way it opens up your worldview to looking at everything around you as problems or, temporary limits that you can go push past, that to me is the biggest piece of entrepreneurship, because I was messing around with stuff for 2 or 3 years while I still had a job. And it just affected the way I approached all of my goals, all the things that I wanted to do. And it all started from trying to figure out what I could create, what I could put out there that people, might find valuable.
Yeah. And it also led to lots of changes in your life as well. Like aside from work, I mean, like your work, obviously, your income, your ability to travel and be location independent. But then it led, to this quest that you undertook, and like all the struggles that you had for that. And then, the huge success of all the funds that were raised, for Pencils of Promise. And is it Pencils for Promise? Pencils of Promise? Yeah.
Pencils of Promise. They really need to clarify it, because everybody has an issue.
Right. I would say Pencils and Promises, anyway, that great thing, like that, I would say that stuff came from the genesis of that is in those first experiments that you did. And then as you did more, and it's like you embraced like the impossible concept, and I know you went through some struggles with that, with the lawsuit and everything. Like it all led to like what you're doing now, and what you're doing now is going to lead to the next thing. So it kind of builds.
So to take it back to the beginning, all the ultra marathons that I just finished up last year started with running a 5K about 2 weeks, I think, before I launched. 2 weeks maybe after I launched the blog, and about a week before I met you for your first book tour. So pulling that all full circle. But yeah, it kind of all grew out of that. I was like, oh, let's see what I can do with this 5K. And then it ended up, taking me, everywhere.
Right. 5K. Wow.
trying to get as many countries as you are. So
from 5K to 7 ultra marathons. Right. So I guess the tip for listeners is be careful what you wish for. Be careful once you start going down some road, you don't know where you're going to end up.
Yeah, that's funny. Awesome. So as far as if people are interested in starting to do a side hustle, you have the book, you have the podcast. Where are the best places that people can kind of dig in and find out more about the side hustle lifestyle?
Sure. Well, yeah, I try to do 80% or more of my work for free or low cost. So, the book is available at every library. If you don't want to buy it, it's also at every bookstore, online retailer. Sidehustleschool.com. You can come there. I got some free stuff. The show is free every day. I would say start with that, and then pretty much every day on the show, I'm talking about different resources and other websites and other people doing interesting stuff. And so, for every single episode, we have show notes, just like you do on your show, I'm sure. And in those notes, we're linking out to a lot of other resources as well.
Okay. One more question for you before I let you go. As far as you said, you have 45 cities down on this tour.
I think I need to count them up.
And trying to get to 100. Beyond that, what's next? What's next for you? You've been to every country in the world. Mm-hmm. You travel all the time. You write books on a insane schedule that I have no idea. It makes me feel inadequate. I got to keep up with you. But
keep waiting for your book, Joel.
Yeah, I'm working on it. Okay. I'll work on it. But what's next for you?
Yeah, I think right now I'm still actually completely immersed and invested in the side hustle concept for all of 2018. Like, I renewed the commitment to do an episode every single day. So it's basically our second set of 365 stories. And of course, I'm doing other stuff too. But I like having this framework or this routine. Like, no matter what else I'm doing in my life, no matter where I am in the world, like, there is this episode that's going out. So I'm focused on that. We produced World Domination Summit, going into year number 8 of that. We've definitely evolved over the past couple of years. Would love for anybody who's listening to come and join us. It's in the summer every year in Portland, Oregon. What else am I doing? I don't know. Just trying to find my way through life. Like, we're all on a journey, right? We're all trying to make our way. So whenever we do these interviews, it's always like, I want to be careful about like being put on a pedestal or whatever, because I have issues, I have problems just like anybody else. So trying to work through some of that stuff too.
Can I like to ask our guests one other question before they get off, and the question is, a lot of times we talk about stuff that we went through, and we do like a retrospective on it. But a lot of times when we're looking at challenges or we're thinking about doing challenges, there's something out there that scares us that we're like, I don't know if I want to talk about that yet. I love to tell the story, when it's all done. But is there anything going on or any big things that you're kind of like eyeing that maybe scare you, or you're not sure, you're like, you want to talk about it until the story's all over? Is there anything like that?
Yeah, I know. I don't mind answering that question. It's good, actually. I am struggling a bit with depression and anxiety, and I write about it a little bit on my blog to some degree. And I do hope to be able to share more about that at some point. But I'd say that's just something I'm trying to kind of work through, and got some different treatments and just trying to figure out, what I should do. And I think maybe it's like, there's this quote I heard a long, long time ago from Jason Mraz, the musician. And he talked about like going through this period of depression himself. And he said, like, everybody was like, oh, but you have like a great life, and you have everything, right? And he said, well, I'm successful, but just because you're successful doesn't mean you can't experience melancholy or sorrow, or loss or anything like that. And I thought a lot about that. And so, those are the kind of things that I'm working through or trying to, broadly speaking. But when you go down that road, it's kind of like the impossible ultramarathon road. You don't always know what's on the other side. You don't know exactly where you're going to end up. So that's the fun experience of my life at the moment.
Well, I think the lesson there is that even though you're successful, it doesn't mean you can't have problems. But also, just because you have problems doesn't mean you can't keep pushing forward. And you're doing that every single day with the podcast. You're inspiring a lot of people, and you're changing a lot of lives, including mine. So I have to say thank you one more time for that.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I will link to all the things that you mentioned down in the show notes. And I'm sure when you have a new project coming up, we'll get you back on the podcast, and we'll do this all again sometime soon. Okay?
That'd be awesome. Thank you so much, Joel.
All right. Thanks, Chris.
Cheers.
All right, there we go. I hope you guys enjoyed that podcast with Chris. Thank you, Chris, for coming on the podcast. And I want to say thank you from me for all the things that you've done over the last 7 years. If you guys want to win a copy of Chris's book, Side Hustle, From Idea to Income in 27 Days, I'm giving away 3 copies. And all you have to do is leave a review on iTunes for the podcast, and then tweet or share it on Facebook and tag Impossible HQ in the comments. I'll pick 3 winners and send those books out, and you guys can use it to start getting started on your side hustle. If you guys want to support the podcast, you can leave a rating and review on iTunes. It's the best way for more people to find out about us. We're still on the homepage of iTunes, so we're getting a lot of new listeners. Thank you guys for listening. A recent review I want to highlight. It says, "Get off the hamster wheel." Joel offers so much knowledge on how you can stop running on the hamster wheel and start expanding your mind, money, body, and life to do impossible things. Thank you, City Light 6. It's not just me. It's a lot of the guests that I'm very lucky to get on this show. So go ahead and leave a rating or review. It helps us out a ton. Like I said at the beginning of the show, we are doing a cold shower therapy winter challenge. You can find all the details at impossiblechallenges.com. It's a private Facebook group you can join and join other people doing hard, impossible things. Cold shower therapy is a 30-day challenge where you can actually practice getting comfortable while doing something uncomfortable. A lot of people talk about it. A lot of people post Instagram quotes. Very few people do it. So here at Impossible, we're a little bit about talk, but we're mostly about action. So get out of your mind, get into your body, take the challenge, join the group, impossiblechallenges.com. Check it out. Finally, if you want to support your body, you've got aches and pains, or you're an athlete, and I like the quote, "If you've got a body, you're an athlete," and you want to start performing better, you want to start feeling better, you want to start moving well, check out movewellapp.com. This is the mobility app that I wish I would have had when I first got hurt. We built it specifically to help athletes get stronger, faster, help reduce the friction to actually do mobility work. If you're sitting down at your desk for 8 hours a day and you do 10 to 15 minutes of mobility work, you're going to feel a world of difference. Trust me on this. Go check it out. It's a free app. You can subscribe to a pro edition, but you can check it out. You can download. You can use the routines for free. It's going to get you started taking care of your body. One of my favorite quotes in the world is, "There's no such thing as overtraining, just under recovery." So MoveWell app will help make sure you get your 10 to 15 minutes of recovery in a day. It'll make it easy, make it simple. Check it out, movewellapp.com. Get stronger, get faster, and start moving well today. All right, guys, that's it for the show. I hope you enjoyed this one as much as I did. Until next week, keep pushing your limits and do something impossible.